The soldier who noticed the wrong tree was never supposed to notice anything like that. In 1944, the United States Army believed in order. Men were sorted into clear categories: riflemen, machine gunners, artillery observers, intelligence officers, trained snipers. If a skill mattered, it had a name, a manual, and a place in doctrine. This man had none of that. On paper, he was just another infantryman standing in a frozen foxhole, holding a standard rifle with iron sights, doing exactly what everyone else around him was doing. No college education, no formal reconnaissance training, no optics, no authority to question what aircraft maps and trained officers had already failed to find. Yet outside Bastogne, the one skill that mattered most was something the Army had never taught him. He learned it long before the war in a place where missing small details had consequences. He grew up in a narrow valley where winters were long, food was limited, and ammunition was not something you wasted. Hunting was not a pastime there. It was survival. You paid attention because you had to. You learned the difference between a branch that had always bent that way and one that bent because something had just moved. You learned how shadows behaved at certain hours. You learned to judge distance without tools because tools cost money. Wind, light, and movement were not separate ideas. They blended together, and if you could not read them as one, you went home empty-handed. By the time he put on a uniform, his brain was already trained to do something the military could not teach quickly. He could memorize terrain so completely that change felt obvious rather than subtle. When the Army gave him a rifle, it did not turn him into something new. It simply placed him in a different version of the same problem. Most soldiers were trained to look for enemies. He had learned to look for mistakes. In combat, that difference mattered. On earlier battlefields, where vegetation concealed machine guns and ambush positions, he noticed something others missed. You rarely saw the weapon itself. What gave it away was imbalance, a texture that did not match, a symmetry nature usually avoided, darkness that was too even, stillness where there should have been variation. Other men searched for guns. He searched for contradictions. So, when winter locked the Ardennes in ice, and easy company dug into frozen earth, he did not stare at the tree line, hoping to see movement. He studied it the same way he had studied forests as a boy. Slowly, repeatedly, tree by tree, gap by gap, shadow by shadow. Not because he expected something new to appear, but because he expected something to change. Day after day, the forest looked identical. To everyone else, it was scenery. To him, it became a record his mind quietly stored. That was why, when one shape appeared where nothing had been the day before, he noticed immediately, not as a weapon but as an error. From 1,600 meters away, the tree line north of the American foxholes looked calm. Snow on the ground, pines, standing still, no sound, no flash, no movement. Most men thought the forest was frozen in time. He thought it was wrong. The issue was not that something new existed. It was that something existed where nothing was supposed to change. He had not used binoculars not because he lacked them, but because he did not need them. Magnification showed detail. Memory revealed change. Change was the only thing that mattered. Each morning he ran the same inventory in his head. Spacing of trunks, angles of branches, gaps where snow settled. After several days, that stretch of forest was clearer to him than any map. When the anomaly appeared, it stood out instantly. Shorter than the surrounding pines, too symmetrical, too clean, and sitting in a spot that had been empty the day before. Trees do not grow overnight. He did not fire. He did not raise his rifle. He did not shout. He waited. Nothing moved. No wind disturbance, no wildlife reaction. The shape stayed perfectly still as if it had been placed there. That stillness confirmed what his instincts already knew. This was not camouflage meant to fool the eye. It was camouflage meant to blend into expectation. He called over a senior non-commissioned officer and pointed it out. Through binoculars, it looked natural. Bark, snow, covered branches, everything you would expect. Except it had not been there. The decision that followed mattered more than the observation itself. Trusting one soldier's memory meant questioning days of reconnaissance aircraft reports, intelligence briefings, and careful observation by trained men. But it also meant accepting a simple truth. If the forest had changed, something caused it. Coordinates were passed. Artillery was alerted. Guns were laid quietly. Then the forest exploded. Shells tore through the tree-lined snow and wood flew, and moments later came the unmistakable sound of secondary detonations, ammunition cooking off. When the smoke cleared, the shape was gone. What remained was twisted metal, shattered timbers, and the wreckage of a German 88mm gun positioned for direct fire. It had been moved under cover of darkness, camouflaged perfectly and ready to fire. Had it opened up at dawn, it would have torn through the American line at point-blank range. Foxholes would have meant nothing. That morning, one mistake in the forest prevented a massacre that had not yet begun. The irony was unavoidable. The gun crew had followed doctrine. Timing was right, camouflage was correct. They were beaten not by superior weapons, but by a man who noticed that one tree did not belong. That raised an uncomfortable question. If one untrained rifleman could see what the system missed, how many other dangers went unnoticed simply because no one was looking the right way? What happened outside Bastogne was not an exception. It was the clearest example of a pattern that had already appeared months earlier. Long before winter froze, the Ardennes, the same way of seeing, had surfaced in a very different place. Normandy. There, the problem was not distance, but proximity. The hedgerows turned roads into traps. Stone walls, tangled roots, thick vegetation cut visibility down to a few dozen meters. German machine gun crews fired briefly, killed men, and relocated before artillery could respond. Soldiers were dying without ever seeing who shot them. Most men reacted by scanning harder. More binoculars, more suspicion. Every bush looked dangerous. He did something else. He stopped looking for weapons and started studying the hedgerows themselves. After days in the same terrain, he learned their texture. Where branches sagged naturally, where stones gathered moss, where gaps filled unevenly. The landscape developed a baseline in his mind. So when gunfire erupted from a position no one could identify, he did not search for muzzle flash. He searched for imbalance. One section looked darker than the rest, not because of shadow, but because it was too uniform, too deliberate. He fired without confirmation. To everyone else, it looked like blind shooting into vegetation. Then the gun stopped. When the unit advanced, they found a machine gun position hidden behind branches arranged to look natural. 2 enemy soldiers lay dead. Asked how he had seen it, he gave an answer that confused his officers. He said he had not seen the gun. He had seen where the hedge was wrong. That answer stayed with them because it kept working. Later in villages instead of forests, the same logic applied. Buildings replaced trees, windows replaced branches, shadows replaced gaps in foliage. Where others scanned for faces, he watched shadows. One window at Foy was wrong. Too dark, too still. Then, a faint flicker of light inside. He stepped into the open street, drew fire, dropped to one knee, and fired once. No correction, no second shot. Moments later, a helmet fell from the window. The sniper was dead. He had not outshot the enemy. He had out-observed him. The rifle was only the last step. The real work had already been done. After the war, no one asked him to explain how his mind worked. Not officially, not seriously. The army demobilized millions of men and moved on to the next conflict, the next doctrine, the next technology that promised to prevent surprise. Radar, early warning systems, satellites. Every generation believed it had finally solved the problem of not seeing danger in time. Every generation learned that danger did not always announce itself in ways machines were built to detect. What made his story uncomfortable was not that it was extraordinary. It was that it was inconvenient. His ability did not fit into charts, procurement plans, or training pipelines. It could not be issued, standardized, or scaled. On patience, long periods of watching without acting, memorizing without recording, trusting memory over instruments. In a culture that valued speed data and immediate feedback, his way of seeing looked inefficient, but that inefficiency saved lives. Those who served with him understood something others did not. His effectiveness came from restraint, from waiting longer than most men were comfortable waiting, from refusing to label uncertainty as safety. Stillness did not mean absence. It meant concealment until proven otherwise. That assumption ran against human instinct. Most people relax when nothing changes. The brain filters repetition. That is efficient in daily life. It is deadly in war. He had learned to distrust familiarity. In the woods where he grew up, stillness could mean prey pressed flat against bark. Missing that difference meant missing a meal. Over time, the familiar never faded into the background for him. It stayed sharp. That habit followed him into uniform. Where others relaxed, he became more alert. Quiet meant time. Time meant preparation. preparation meant danger. He was not always right. He simply noticed enough to be right when it mattered. Many days passed with no discovery, no reward. For others, that kind of waiting was unbearable. For him, it was normal. It was not intuition. It was discipline without language. He did not think in steps. He thought in contrasts, in what belonged and what did not. That made his skill hard to teach and harder to measure. It produced nothing until it produced everything. Institutions struggle with people like him. They prefer skills that show progress during training. His skill showed nothing until it changed outcomes. After Bastogne, officers trusted him but could not replicate him. His value existed before rank, before doctrine, shaped by necessity, not instruction. Instruction teaches what to look for. Necessity teaches what happens if you do not. At Foy, there was no forest to study, no days to build memory, only streets, walls, windows, and the certainty that someone was watching. Most men hide. That would have meant death. He stepped into the open, not from bravado but calculation. He forced a reaction, forced a reveal. The sniper fired because doctrine told him to exploit exposure. That decision gave away position. Again, observation decided the outcome. After the war, stories like his faded quietly because they did not fit narratives of progress and technological superiority. His story suggested limits, organizational blind spots, assumptions about what matters. He simply watched longer than most men could tolerate. Today we give his skill names: cognitive pattern recognition, situational awareness, anomaly detection. Labels that make it sound transferable. It was not. It was personal, contextual, earned through consequence. The Army could not replicate his childhood. Simulations approximate stress. They do not replace stakes. That is why similar stories still appear. Pilots, engineers, doctors who sense something wrong before instruments confirm it. They cannot always explain how they know. They just know. Organizations struggle with them until they prevent disaster. Then they fade back into obscurity. He did not seek recognition. Even if he had, it would not have matched his contribution. There was no spectacle. He noticed. He waited. He pointed. Others acted. Men lived. That is not how institutions celebrate success. Yet those who were there remembered. They remembered the calm certainty with which he spoke, the absence of argument, the trust in memory earned long before the war. His story is not about one man beating a system. It is about a system unknowingly relying on skills it never acknowledged. The forest did not reveal the gun because camouflage failed. It revealed it because someone knew what the forest was supposed to look like. That distinction matters beyond war. Danger often arrives, disguised as normality, a process, a signal, a pattern that almost fits expectation. Most people ignore it. Those who notice are dismissed until it is too late. He noticed early. Because of that, one morning passed quietly when it should not have. No shells fell. No men were cut down crossing open ground. No letters were written explaining why someone would not be coming home. History rarely records those absences. But they matter, and they are why this story endures. As a legend, but as a reminder that attention trained under real consequence remains one of the most powerful forces on any battlefield, and perhaps the most overlooked. As the years passed, what lingered from his experience was not the memory of combat but the habit of watching. Even in civilian life, those who knew him noticed it. He paid attention to things other people passed without thought. A machine that sounded slightly off. A process that took a little longer than it should have. A routine that no longer matched yesterday's routine. He rarely spoke first. He listened. When he did say something, it was often short and difficult to dismiss. The same pattern that had once revealed a gun hidden in a forest now revealed problems long before they became obvious to anyone else. This was not a gift that turned off when the war ended. It stayed with him because it had never belonged to the war in the first place. It belonged to how his mind had been trained to treat the world. Attention was not something he turned on when danger appeared. It was the default state. That is why his experience offers something more unsettling than a battlefield lesson. It suggests that attention is not a reaction, it is a posture. And postures, once learned under real consequence, do not easily fade. Modern institutions often mistake attention for alertness. They believe it can be switched on when needed. Alarms sound. Procedures activate. Eyes focus. But that kind of attention is reactive. It responds to signals that already exist. What saved lives outside Bastogne was not reaction. It was anticipation born from familiarity. He did not wait for a signal. He noticed the absence of what should have been familiar. This difference explains why technology so often arrives late to disaster. Sensors are built to detect known threats. Systems are trained on expected patterns. They excel at confirming what designers already believe matters. They struggle with the unexpected because the unexpected does not register as a signal. It registers as noise. He had learned never to dismiss noise too quickly. Noise was where mistakes hid. In this way, his story becomes less about war and more about how humans interact with complexity. Complex systems fail not because they stop working, but because they keep working while the world around them changes. The forest looked the same because everyone expected it to look the same. He noticed it had not. That ability remains rare, not because it is mystical, but because it is uncomfortable. Sustained attention is tiring. Watching without acting creates anxiety. Most people relieve that anxiety by convincing themselves that nothing is wrong. He had learned to live with it. That tolerance for uncertainty was forged early, when guessing carried real cost. In environments where error is punished gently, attention dulls. In environments where error is punished harshly, attention sharpens. This is why his skill cannot be mass-produced. It requires stakes that institutions are unwilling, and often unable, to recreate. Training seeks safety. His learning came from risk. That distinction matters more than doctrine admits. After the war, as militaries around the world studied lessons learned, few paused to consider the quiet ones. Reports focused on weapons systems, logistics, command decisions. They rarely documented the moments where catastrophe did not happen because someone noticed something small. Absence is difficult to analyze. It leaves no wreckage, no crater, no casualty list. But absence is often the most valuable outcome. The forest that did not erupt at dawn became just another morning. Nothing happened. That is why it vanished from official memory. But for the men who would have crossed open ground that day, nothing happening was everything. This imbalance between lived experience and recorded history explains why stories like his survive mainly through those who were there. They remember because their bodies remember. They remember the cold, the waiting, the quiet certainty that followed his observation. Long after reports were filed and archives closed, those memories remained sharper than any official account. In later conflicts, similar patterns repeated under different names. A pilot aborts a mission because something feels off. An engineer halts a process because a vibration sounds wrong. It delays a procedure because a patient's posture does not match their vitals. In each case, the decision is questioned. Procedures are cited, data is demanded, and sometimes the decision is proven right only because disaster never occurs. When that happens, institutions often fail to reward the choice. They reward compliance. They reward action. They reward visible outcomes. Quiet prevention leaves no proof. He lived his entire life in that space. Effective, uncelebrated, difficult to categorize. That is why his story resonates beyond war. It speaks to a universal tension between systems and individuals. Systems crave predictability. Individuals perceive nuance. Systems demand justification. Individuals act on recognition. When the two align, progress happens. When they diverge, survival often depends on whether someone is willing to trust what cannot yet be proven. He was trusted because results had accumulated, but trust came slowly. It always does. The cost of ignoring him would have been measured in bodies. The cost of trusting him was only uncertainty. That trade is one institutions resist until forced. His experience shows that some of the most valuable skills appear useless until the exact moment they are needed. Before that moment, they look like overthinking. After that moment, they look like foresight. The difference lies in timing, not ability. He did not change who he was when war arrived. War simply revealed what had already been there. That is perhaps the most sobering part of his story. It suggests that extraordinary impact does not always come from becoming something new. Sometimes it comes from remaining exactly what you already are, in a place where that matters. When the forest outside Bastogne revealed its secret, It did not do so because camouflage failed or doctrine erred. It did so because someone knew, intimately, what normal looked like. That knowledge was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was earned slowly, quietly, over years, when attention meant survival. And when the moment came, it was enough. No heroics, no speeches, just a simple statement that changed everything. There is a tendency to romanticize such stories, to turn them into myths. That misses the point. He was not special because he was rare. He was rare because the conditions that produced him are rare, and because modern life works hard to remove those conditions. Convenience dulls attention. Abundance reduces consequence. Systems absorb responsibility. In doing so, they also absorb awareness. His life reminds us that attention is not automatic. It is trained, and when it is trained under consequence, it becomes one of the most decisive forces available to any human being. That truth remains uncomfortable. It challenges the belief that progress alone keeps us safe. It suggests that no matter how advanced our tools become, someone still needs to notice when something does not belong. And if no one is trained to do that, then all the technology in the world will only confirm what we already expect to see.